And there we go. Back for the last meeting of Persuasion. This reminds me, I'll tell you, I'll ask you about this after we're done recording this, but I have a potentially interesting development for our next book.
You mean Northanger?
Yeah, I want to see how that sounds to you. But we'll wrap this up first. But you said you wanted to start. This, of course, is the one where we talk about the critical apparatus. But you wanted to start with the preface from Meyer-Spachs here.
Patricia Meyer-Spachs edited this edition, and several editions of this have come out. I guess the first one was in 95. Two, it looks like. The first was 95, and then they reissued it and updated it with new contexts and whatnot in 2013. And I know that we've noticed, as I think most people that use Norton a lot notice, not all editors do this work the same. Claudia Johnson, who is represented, I think, in this volume.
Always good to see Claudia Johnson.
That article was really long, and I didn't get to it. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it.
I have a few things to say about that one, yeah.
Good, because she, in general, I find her to be a top-flight writer, even when I'm not agreeing with her. But her style of editing the books that we used by her, which I think there were two of them, were like very engaged and in conversation, like a lot with text. Whereas I think Meyer-Spachs has a much more reserved touch. The footnotes are a little more sparse. There are some interesting ones, to be sure. But I just find her to be less chatty page to page. Would you say that's probably true?
I would agree. It is possible, I will say, that Persuasion maybe just needs less conversation. Than some of the other novels.
That's right, and I think that would be a challenge. I've never edited it. I know you've done some editing that you might speak to in terms of having to make choices about when to put a footnote and call out an allusion versus when to just let the reader do the work themselves. So maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So as you know, I just finished. Editing a collection of short stories from an early 1900s writer from Lancaster, and one of the big jobs was footnoting things. His style of writing included a lot of allusions. I feel like more read up on the Bible now than I have in years, because he used a lot of kind of like puns based on things from the Bible, not things that most biblical readers would like to see, I think, in that style of humor. But then also a lot of things from the 19-teens Broadway and stuff like that. So it is this kind of weird question, right, where you have to sort of, and this is maybe a place, I don't know yet, but this is maybe a place where you can fail pretty badly without knowing it at the time, but you have to imagine a reader and what that reader needs to know, right? So for instance, there were several moments where I thought to myself, well, people will get the basic gist here, like that is when it says, I'm not so and so, but here's what I think. You don't have to be an expert to know, so this person is some kind of authority on expert in the field. But then there were sometimes these added jokes, right? There's a reoccurring allusion to a guy named King Ben, which, as it turns out, this was the nickname of a guy who was the leader of an upstate New York cult in the early 1900s, who had kind of built a harem for himself.
Okay, and a precursor to the Mormon New York, the founding of Mormonism.
Well, it would have been after that.
Oh, right, it's after,
late 1900s. But much more kind of like. Much more like what I think of as those 1960s cults. It's kind of like hippie-ish, commune style. Except it was happening in like 1910.
Right.
But kind of a sex cult in a lot of ways. And so there were these kind of moments where where it wasn't maybe enough. So to say like, oh, well, this guy must have been some sort of expert on what women want. But the joke is not complete without that footnote that makes it clear that there are layers here, and one of the layers is he's not an expert; he's a cult leader who just happens to have like 19 wives. Right. And so making the decision, kind of is predicated on this kind of balance between sort of what a reader needs to know, because one of the real pitfalls, I think, one of the real traps waiting to catch you is overdoing it and condescending.
Yeah.
I want to come back to that word before we're done today, but condescending to your readers.
Yeah.
If you for instance, if you say, Napoleon, and
Right.
then you footnote Napoleon, you're saying something
Yeah,
about what you think your readers know or
There
don't
was this
know.
French guy.
Yeah. So hold on a minute.
Yeah.
And so you have to be careful about that, but you don't want to underdo it. And so there is, I think, and I'm certainly not trying to pretend like I got it right. I hope I did some of the time, but there is this trick, I think, to balancing, that kind of authoritative voice that you're injecting into the text.
Yeah.
And I thought, just again, a quick tangent. Getting ready for today's meeting, one of the things I did was kind of wistfully think back to the good old was it Sense and Sensibility that Johnson?
Yeah.
Thinking back to just how much I enjoyed her treatment of Sense and Sensibility, and I Googled her and found that she's still teaching at Princeton, and she has like Zoom office hours by appointment. Which, by the way, even all these years in, I'm always amazed when these sort of big name scholars are just kind of available.
Yeah.
And for just a minute.
You thought about logging in.
For just a minute, I thought, what if I just emailed her and had her zoom in on our conversation?
Which we could maybe do for Northanger.
Right.
I mean, for one of the sequences.
Would she? I suspect we'd get a very polite, my appearance fee is. But all the same. I think to come back to your original point and to echo it, I think it's a tricky bit of work.
Yeah.
And finding that balance is complicated, and a lot of it depends on how good a job you do predicting who exactly is going to be reading the book.
Yeah, and we are probably a different kind of reader than this text was prepared for, because I guess you would anticipate that the majority of the readers of this Norton edition would be people much more marinated in British literary history than either of us are. I mean, we're kind of like both dilettantes when it comes to British culture, I think. We know some stuff and we're interested, and after all, when you're teaching English, you end up teaching a lot of British stuff. But our minutia is so much more on this side of the Atlantic that, we're probably not the audience she anticipates.
At the same time,
I
I don't really know how this goes now, but in the old days, right, I would have imagined that the vast majority of readers of an edition like this would have been sophomores in college.
Sure.
With almost no experience.
But in a British lit class.
Right, but in a scenario where someone like Claudia Johnson would be kind of walking them through it.
And that's interesting too.
Yeah.
And so when you're editing like that, and I do have experience editing journal issues, and sometimes when you edit a journal issue, you insert your own article, or same with a book collection, but sometimes you don't. And so when you don't, especially, the introduction, or in this case the preface, is really your only opportunity to just do some of your own interpretive work. While also, in a case like this, you're going to introduce some of the other context contributions, but you get a chance to be heard. And even though this preface was really short, I thought there were a couple of passages I just wanted to highlight from the jump. This first one is on Roman numeral 7. It's in the first page, and it echoes what a lot of critics, both 19th century in the context and 20th and 21st century critics, pointed out, which is the return to romanticism in this novel is a theme it seems like that a lot of critics are into, and they will point out that, well, this sentence kind of does a lot for me here on Roman numeral 7. It's in the middle of the second paragraph. Those with a literary historical bent have noted the incursion of attitudes and assumptions that we associate with romanticism, the novelist who once mocked Marianne's enthusiasm for dead leaves, that's Marianne from Sense and Sensibility, now allows her heroine, without overt criticism, to take pleasure in evidence of the declining year. And I thought, and we'll elaborate on this more with respect to individual articles, but it is true that Anne's position, all these critics seem to be emphasizing, it's an interior, it's an almost like dramatic line between objective reality versus sensibility versus the sort of the way the mind is processing and filtering things, and Anne Elliot's mind becomes more and more dominant, and after the climactic accident scene at Lyme, it's like bam, you move into the second half of the novel and Anne's consciousness is ready to go. And yeah, I mean, that is Wordsworthian, and it's Mary Shelley like, I think, and I agree with some of these critics that, you know, there's a depth there that almost calls into question whether the blade of grass exists at all without you perceiving it. Mm-hmm. That I think Austen was more willing to mock in earlier novels than she is in this, and to give more credit to the workings of one individual mind. And so then, over on page Roman numeral 8, she says, the novel reminds us how rich an emotional life may underlie exemplary female conduct. And I liked that because, and she even mentions Fanny in the, oh no, she refers to a letter to Austen's friend Fanny Knight.
Right.
But I thought of Fanny Price, who does come up in some of the critics, like, sometimes you wonder if they're so good, are they boring? Like Jane Fairfax and Emma, is she a little boring? Is Fanny boring? Right. Is Eleanor boring? And so, I think the answer to all those is kind of yes. And with Anne, it's like, no, she's like super interesting and even appealing and sexy, and the ebb and flow of beauty is also subjective too, and like she's doing all the right things and being super interesting while doing it. I thought that was a nice catch. And then finally, there's this other moment where she says something like, oh yeah, this is back on Roman numeral 7. The social context in which Austen chose, she's referring to William Haley's essay on old maids. And she says the social context in which Austen chose to investigate the emotional situation of a 27-year-old unmarried woman. For Austen, at least in her role as fiction maker, as for Haley, marriage constituted the happy ending of a woman's youth. I thought that was a beautiful turn of phrase. And although it made me wonder, isn't that really the happy ending of a man's youth also? Like, I mean, I think there's a way of looking at it that is so. Well, but I understand the difference too.
Yeah, I think one of the things built into that is this idea that, you know, a man can be a man without being married in this world, but a woman is not quite fully a woman until she's married.
Yeah. And then she goes on to say, well, within this conceptual framework, Austen found it possible to imagine a woman neither preoccupied with marriage nor initially convinced that no female fulfillment can exist outside of it. So kind of like, yes, it's the happy ending of a woman's youth, but a woman while young and after being young is also quite capable of thinking about issues as big as the British Navy, economy, fairness, religious aspirations, making judgments about other people's relationships and how they treat people. So this is a nice little preface, I think, that just speaks to... Oh, and then finally, Julia Kavanaugh, whose essay I did read on Roman numeral 9, observes that the portrayal of Anne constitutes, quote, the first genuine picture of the silent torture of an unloved woman. I thought that was beautiful. That's like an 1860-something essay by Julia Kavanaugh. The silent torture of an unloved woman. That is a nice word group there by Kavanaugh, and I can see why. So this preface, while not that long, I never read introductions or prefaces since we've been doing this, because I do want to sort of let the plot unfold first, then go back.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I enjoyed this preface. I thought it was a nice brief, but nice little table set for why she made the choices she did with the apparatus.
Yeah, and I think you know the essays after the fact follow through with this, you know, kind of nicely. if the preface is a bit of a promise, then the after material kind of lives up to that promise, in the sense especially that there's all this focus on consciousness.
Yeah.
Right? For other reasons, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and the kind of like the idea of the formation of a character that is independent of what that character does is a really interesting question, right? That who is this person, and is there a way to understand that not simply relative to their acts?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Henry James leaps to mind.
Yeah, and it's we boil things down to, well, tell me about him, and the first thing is, well, you say somebody's job.
Right.
Or, I mean, all you can really go by is what people are doing.
Right.
And it's why people will say, well, actions speak louder than words.
Right.
But maybe a book like this says, well, do they? Because a lot of times you can be pushing all these buttons, and, if you are, let's say, volunteering at the hospital 15 hours a week, and you don't have a relationship, and you just go home to your cat and you microwave your little bowl of lasagna every night, and you stay up all night listening to conspiracy theory radio or whatever it is that people do when they're not being seen, is that not arguably a bigger indices of who they are than what you saw? Like, maybe they're not just the self-sacrificing innocent flower,
Well, right. So what we kind of run into, and I think this kind of dovetails nicely into what a lot of these critics have to say about Persuasion. Although, I will say I was a little put off. This will be my requisite criticism of the edition. I think that Meyer-Spachs picked 3 different essays, at least 2. I'm not sure if I'm exaggerating in my memory. At least 2, maybe 3 different essays that were really not concerned with this book at all. That really wanted to talk about the movie Emma.
Or Persuasion. Yeah,
sorry,
I didn't read those because I have not seen the movie.
Right, and I kind of skimmed through them, and they make these kind of, potentially interesting points about the movie that kind of incidentally make points about what those critics think that the decisions in the film sort of have to say about how those filmmakers read the book.
Yeah.
But I was a little put off by this emphasis of the film adaptation. I mean, still, it's only 2 essays out of 15 or so.
But it's a lighter body of criticism anyway.
Yes, and so
the percentage is augmented.
So I was a little put off by that. But I will say, I think, with that exception, part of the slimness of this, and it goes along with what you're saying, I think, about the preface. Part of the slimness about here is it really kind of lets the cat out of the bag that what Meyer-Spachs is really interested in, I think, and this even comes through in some of the film essays that I kind of scan through, is this question of consciousness, this question of identity, sort of internal, sort of Henry Jamesian, stuff, and how that kind of collides in what feels to me like a very 20th century way, like with the kind of demands of kind of social institutions, social order, that kind of thing. The thing from the preface that really struck me about that, I think, was towards the end, where she says something about how Austin has decided that the Navy won't replace the aristocracy,
right?
But it has proven that it would be a better version of that institution than the aristocrats.
And we spent a lot of time in our casts, the 2 casts we did of the book, pointing out that this is in some ways a more biting social critique than even Mansfield Park was, or than any of them so far, in as much as through her father and older sister, the aristocracy is, and this one is not dedicated to some prince, regent either, right? But through the father and the older sister, the idea of baronetage is made to look so freaking small. And and William Elliot gets a lot of attention from some of these critics too. He's like the inheritor. He's going to get the entail. And he's so small. And there's just not really any interest in, Anne's like, you know what, take the house. Like, I'm going to roll with these sailors and these admirals,
Right.
and
We're going to live on a boat.
Yeah, like, and I think that is definitely a biting critique of what maybe Austen saw as, well, the best of this, as represented by your Darcys and your Knightleys, is just on the wane. It's all soured. It's been reduced to guys like Walter Elliot. Just fucking go get on a boat.
Right.
You know, I mean, does that seem fair?
I think so, and I think Walton Lintz in the first essay called New Landscapes really kind of like calls this in.
Yeah, that is one I looked at. So yeah,
and you know where I think the fireworks really start is in this invocation of D.H. Lawrence's attack on Jane Austen on 232, which I actually took a bit personally.
Yeah,
I mean, if
you should read that passage.
Well, you know, so it's a long quote, but something that Lawrence published in what 1930.
It seems to have been his self-analysis of Lady Chatterley's lover, like he's talking about his own novel.
Right. Yeah, and so he writes, the sense of isolation followed by the sense of menace and of fear is bound to arise as the feeling of oneness and community with our fellow men declines. So very 1930s.
Yeah.
Very, of course.
Well, in 2020s.
Well, I mean, of course he's thinking about this in this moment. And the feeling of individualism and personality, which I think is exactly... I mean, here's where I agree with Lawrence.
Yeah.
He is right that Persuasion is about individuality and personality, right? Which is existence in isolation increases. Class hate and class consciousness are only a sign that the old togetherness, the old blood warmth has collapsed, and every man is really aware of himself in apartness. In the old England, the curious blood connections held the classes together. The squires might be arrogant, violent, bullying, and unjust, yet in some ways they were at one with the people, part of the same bloodstream. We feel it in Defoe or Fielding, and then in mean Jane Austen it is gone. Already this old maid type personality instead of character, the sharp knowing in apartness instead of knowing in togetherness.
Yeah, that is a powerful contrast to me of Emma versus Anne Elliot. Because Emma is very much holding it all together. She's all about togetherness, you know, like the whole community's... She wants to be the heartbeat of it, of course, but she's just deeply attuned to her role as puppet master. And Anna's like, you know, I see what y'all are doing here, but she's not deeply into the togetherness.
Well, what I would say is that in her way,
yeah,
Emma is also a part in the sense that she holds herself above most of this. She's never going to get married. Why would I? She says. I can be over here doing all this stuff instead. And we see the same thing in, you know, in Anne Elliot to some extent, although I think Anne has, because of this kind of move toward, you know, internal consciousness, we see a warmth in Anne that we maybe don't see. I'm blanking on the older sister's name in Sense and Sensibility.
Eleanor.
Yeah, you know, we see these kinds of things that I think, you know, but this idea, I you know, I mean, you know, I'm somewhat speaking from just my sense of like contemporary moments right now, but this idea, you know, Lawrence mentions blood 3 times here. Right?
Yeah.
There's a kind of like there's a kind of I don't know, racial component of this idea.
English blood is white blood.
This idea that there is this kind of thing that makes it all okay. This sense of belonging, this sense of being okay with the system. And I think what Lawrence is really responding to is you know, having observed this very credible criticism of the system, right? Anne Elliot didn't just sort of wake up one day and say, you know, I'm going to have this kind of sharp understanding from apartness, right? She was made to be apart, and
of course. To be fair, and I don't know that much about D.H. Lawrence. I've cited some of his work on Melville before, and he's a pretty... He's invested in his role as a literary critic. He's not just a poet and novelist. He thought of himself as, but I think to be fair, by 1930, of course, you've seen World War One, and we talked about that when we did the cast on Magic Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
How and heck, by 1930, you're pinwheeling into World War Two as well, right? You've got the Depression happening in the United States, and problems not just in Germany but throughout Europe. So you're kind of looking at, I guess, if in Persuasion, Austen is noticing what I call the souring of the aristocracy into just small meanness, and the rise of this sort of like Navy class as robust, fresh, new blood, to pun on Lawrence. Maybe by 1930, Lawrence has observed a similar souring of what those navies promised, because in the end it climaxed with death on a scale that no one had ever seen. That is World War One. Yes, aristocrats fought their bloody wars also, but I don't think Europeans were prepared for the level of carnage that Lawrence saw by 1930.
Right.
And so these guys like Admiral Croft or Captain Wentworth, while super cool, it's like we're persisting, we're young, this is new, this modern state.
Right.
And so maybe by 1930, and maybe Lawrence is almost taking a Hemingway sort of, fuck, man, it all just ends in death and madness. Like, maybe the old blood ties were better. Like, so I wonder if that's on his mind. Just a nihilism towards modernity.
Maybe, although, I think a vision of that somehow rejects interiority.
Yeah.
Feels, I don't know. I can't shake this sense that Lawrence is saying, look, I'm on William Eliot's side.
Yeah.
I'm
Walter Elliot.
Who's the heir?
Oh yeah, William Eliot's the heir.
Yeah, I'm on William Eliot's side. Like I want this world where for no particular reason, this guy just gets it all.
Yeah.
And I want people. Not only do I want this world, but I want the people who are left on the outside of this world to be happy about it.
Yeah.
And it just feels incredibly spoiled to me in that sense. And I think,
agree with that.
And I think the sort of meanness that he's writing onto Austen, I think really just is, what's the old Southernism, right? A hit dog hollers, right? I mean, I think
yes.
he is recognizing that she's kind of gotten the number of these aristocrats and is kind of telling an uncomfortable truth about how this world works.
And when was this essay by Litz published?
65, I want to say.
And what is his? I don't remember. Litz is not in agreement with what Lawrence is saying here, is he? So what is Litz's point for quoting that? Like, is he kind of saying what you're saying, or is he taking a different? Because I find myself not remembering. I did read this one.
I think that the point here. Let me get to the page here so I can see my notes.
You were on like 232.
232. Yeah, I think the point here is that Lawrence has. Here's the sentence after the quote. After we have discounted Lawrence's masculine antagonism toward Jane Austen and his characteristic identification of art with life, we are left with a penetrating statement of the essential themes in Persuasion. So I think what Litz is saying here is some version of, yes, it's about aloneness versus togetherness.
Yeah.
But you have to discount this kind of Lawrence is mad that this is not about like big giant modern art.
Yeah.
And also it's a lady, and
it's not about men,
and he just doesn't like ladies.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a little more complicated than that. I think that part of what's happening here is that Jane Austen and D.H. Lawrence are in a fight about what constitutes art.
Yeah, and the speaking of William Eliot, another essay that appeared in here was Marilyn Butler's 1975 essay, and I read that one, and I think Butler's treatment is somewhat critical, I would say. Like, she believes it's a novel divided against itself. I think kind of the same stuff that caused, what's their name, that caused, I think it was both Julia Kavanaugh and then later John Wiltshire to celebrate. Butler, I think, found it a little bit annoying the way that the hugeness of the shift between everything that led up to the accident at Lyme and everything after, I think Butler found a little rich and a little contrived. Whereas I think Kavanaugh back in the 19th century and Wiltshire in, I guess, 2006, in an essay entitled Anne Eliot's Consciousness, is like, that's the art of it. That's the beauty of it, you know. But one of the things that Butler pointed out that I remember we kind of felt was, and your comment about William Eliot reminded me of this, that she thought it was a little too cute by half the way we shuttled William Eliot off the stage and protected Walter Eliot by, oh, you know what's going to happen? William Eliot's just going to, like, ruin Mrs. Clay by getting her to shack up with him, and then they'll be out the way.
Right.
And I remember thinking, you know, that's just like, let's hurry and get them off the stage so we can get to the business of Anne and Captain. I think you agreed with that was a little, like, we should have seen a little more or something. Right. And so I did agree with Butler on that. What did you think about that comment, like that plot choice by Austen? Was it a little overly cute?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think so. One of the things I have on my brain right now, because of something else I'm working on, is this kind of like romance versus realism thing that has been, you know, kind of haunting me in some ways for a couple of decades.
Yeah.
Right? This idea of, you know, what counts as a good story.
Yeah.
And you know, in the U.S., of course, this became, you know, kind of the business of literary critics and editors. Right around the turn of the century, a little before, you know, the 1880s, 1890s, there was this kind of big question, right? Yeah. And realism won, whether that means it was better or just, you know, more politically expedient or whatever, I don't know. And so, you know, one of the things that I think this novel invokes for me, which may or may not be a fair reading, but just because of where my head is, I think Anne Eliot's sort of interiority and her consciousness and some of the techniques that Austen uses to portray that, I think of as very much in the line of like contemporary realism, like 21st century realism.
Would you say it's part of that realism that sometimes you can be even as conniving and hitting all the right buttons as William Eliot does for a long time, and then along comes a Mrs. Clay, maybe you've had a couple too many drinks, whatever, it's just easy to get knocked off your game. Would you say that's actually a realistic portrayal, like the way he's taken down so immediately, and so is Mrs. Clay after they've both, because she had Walter Eliot, like she was going to get him, like it was clear that he was starting to be attracted to her, and right at the moment that they both really had what they wanted and were being annoying to Anne, they both just like, I don't know, it's like they just hooked up in the hotel room and all is lost. And I wonder if that's not actually realism.
Well, I think there's a couple ways at least of thinking about realism, right? And one of the ways that I think we use maybe more often than we should is this sense of, does this feel credible? Like,
would it happen?
And in that sense, sure.
Yeah.
But if we apply that measure to this, and then kind of think of alternate, like you know how the comics, the old style comics, I guess they still do this. I just haven't been reading comics the same way lately. But you know, they would do these, like they would do a run, you know, and finish an arc, and then it wouldn't be all that unusual for them to sort of like return to that story a couple years later and do like an alternate arc, a non-canon, like what if kind of version. And we could easily imagine another version of this where, you know, William Eliot and Miss Clay hook up, but it's still all in the service of him, of her landing.
They keep it secret,
you know, right? That you know, that he's happy to kind of pimp her out towards Sir Walter. You know, in this way that would maybe be even more despicable. I don't know, depending on your particular values. There, you know, is that credible? Could that happen? Yes, right. And so is it plausible as realism in that sense? I guess so. But the thing that I'm more interested in, the way I'm more interested in thinking about it, is this question, and I think this is at the heart of a lot of our readings of this stuff, is this question of like, does this feel plotted? Does this feel designed? And I think, you know, in that sense, yes. It feel, you know, can we feel the narrative hands moving the clay.
Yeah.
And for me, that in that particular part of the ending, I feel too much aware that like there is a narrative consciousness kind of like needing for something to happen here.
Yeah, because Mrs. Smith sort of, uh, as invalid, telling the story of who William really is, I think was brilliantly done. And Mrs. Smith's a great character, and it is wonderful that one of the things that sort of opens the world up for Anne more fully is just a simple act of kindness from which she expected to get nothing.
Right.
And but I think it laid a trap for Austen, the writer, that she maybe didn't get fully out of. And I think that's Butler's point, which is you made this very, very rich revelation.
Mm-hmm.
It probably means do a little more with William Elliot now, and and it probably means do a little more with Mrs. Clay also, since you've been teasing us all along with that.
Right.
And yet Austen's like, no, but like it's about Anne's consciousness,
Right.
and it's about this moment where Wentworth can't stand it anymore and he has to write the super hot letter. And once that's done, fuck them. They're just minor characters anyway.
Yeah.
And so I think she got herself a bit off a little more than she could chew, as they say, down here in the South, you know.
Well, and I think that's part of it also speaks to the nature of kind of genre, right? In a romance, and I don't necessarily mean a Harlequin, although also, but in a romance, we know the ending.
Yeah.
Like, we know the ending before we've cracked open the book.
Of course.
Right? And so the trick is how to get us to that ending, and how to kind of like make the ride a little thrilling.
Yeah.
Right? In realism, right? The cliche is the characters write themselves.
Yeah.
Right? And so we are as 20th, 21st century readers, we are trained to sort of understand that sometimes the ending isn't an ending,
right?
Because that's just life.
Yeah,
that's how real life is.
Yeah,
and so I think on the one hand, this is a novel that kind of like asks us to kind of go like, huh,
yeah,
disappointing, just like life. But on the other hand, it possesses enough of this kind of romance model that I think a reader would not be out of line in feeling disappointed by that. I think that's kind of a key thing with a lot of Jane Austen. I think and let me just say, in case it sounds like I'm being critical, what I want to say here is I think one of the things that we're discovering is that Jane Austen was like 80 years ahead of her time.
Yeah.
This
book gets published posthumously in 1817, and we're talking about realism, which is more like an early 20th century movement.
I mean, 1880 at the earliest.
The Gilded Age movement.
Yeah. And in some ways, we might argue not even until like 1910, 1920.
Right.
And so she is concerning herself with these issues of like fundamental, the difficult issues, very difficult issues of just like fundamental being. As a human on this planet in a world that doesn't often make a lot of sense if you're not like at the tippy top 1% of it,
and even then maybe not.
Right. And meanwhile other people had to see like an American Civil War, maybe even a World War I before they even started considering this. And Jane Austen is parsing this stuff out. I don't know. Maybe having these brothers in the Navy got her thinking about this a certain way.
And her own sickness. And, Meyer Stacks points out in the introduction. The very first sentence of the preface is Jane Austen wrote Persuasion, her last complete novel, while suffering from the illness, Addison's disease, that would kill her. And there are a couple of essays threaded in here, including the preface. But I've mentioned her a few times, so I'm just going to turn to Kavanaugh. Julia Kavanaugh, The Language of Feeling. It's on 220 in our edition, and she is publishing this in 1862 in a book that was called English Women of Letters. So 1862, speaking of the American Civil War.
Yeah.
And Kavanaugh writes, beyond any other, this is the first sentence of that beautiful little essay. Beyond any other of Miss Austen's tales, Persuasion shows us the phase of her literary character which she chose to keep most in the shade, the tender and the sad. And of course, Meyer Stacks emphasized that too, right? And when she brought up the illness that would kill her, she said, this book has more and deeper sadness than any of the 6 books by Austen. So say these critics, and I think Wiltshire also leans on that a little bit, if I'm not mistaken, the 2006 essay. So what do you think about that? I mean, you know, I think that actually dovetails with what you're saying about taking on these difficult issues. Like, okay, if you're doing that, does it follow that you're going to be kind of sad then? I mean, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's this cliche, right?
Yeah.
That
to think is to be sad.
Right. The great art comes out of pain, right? We're always kind of shocked when we find out, that somebody, who's capable of making great art is well adjusted.
Yeah.
In that sense. And so now I don't mean to say that it has to actually be that way. I think there are a lot of fundamentally amazing writers and other artists who are in fact just happy,
sure,
and doing their thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we have this sense that to really, and by the way, I mean this is what drove a lot of the realism that we saw take over around the turn of the 20th century. The sense that if you really stopped and looked, the world is kind of awful.
Yeah.
And we have to. It was sort of this moral obligation. I think people argued at the time that we had to kind of clear those rose-colored glasses from our sight and take an honest look at things. There's a kind of reform-mindedness that gets lost.
Yeah.
In some of this. I'm reminded that there's a great little cult movie I really like called Roadside Prophets. John Doe from X and Adam Horowitz from the Beastie Boys play a couple guys riding around the Southwest in motorcycles, and they run into this kind of weird sheriff at one point who accuses them of dine and dash. Yeah. And then delivers this monologue. Some of the best, just some of the best writing. Delivers this monologue like sort of straight out of like an Ezra Pound diary about how bad the world is and finishes with this kind of like he's like pulled his revolver and spinning the cylinder to punctuate his thing and ends with this impassioned, the sooner you wake up and realize how things are, the sooner you'll wish you were dead.
Yeah.
And it feels a little bit like how we think about realism now. I think there is this sadness. I think the other thing, and I maybe want to kind of spin back towards this because I think it's maybe more germane. The other thing that I think Jane Austen is just really putting a microscope on in this book is that kind of confluence of class and gender that I think her feelings were hurt in this book. Not by this book, but I think she was expressing some hurt feelings at this. You know how you know a thing, but then like you remember that you know a thing. Yeah. I feel like one of the things Persuasion does is express this sense of kind of like, right, these people with no actual like moral superiority just get to have all the wealth and power.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
These men with no qualifications or credentials, not even good acts.
Yeah.
Just get to be in charge.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, these other good people
yeah.
are just out here doing great stuff, and they're never gonna get it. And I think her feelings are just hurt, and I think Anne Elliot becomes this kind of avatar of this, and I don't know how you tell that without great sadness.
And it probably speaks to why the novel is so famous for its play with the tensions between consciousness and objective reality, because how else would you illuminate that as a big theme of your story without through enlisting the play of an active internal consciousness who's just observing and watching people get and not get in the way that you're talking about. And watching herself be overlooked so egregiously and for so long.
Yeah. Well, and I think something that kind of speaks to this. I'm just going to jump us forward a little bit to Claudia Johnson.
Yeah. This is one I did not read, but I do love her.
Who we've been praising, and who I think did some great stuff.
This is from an essay. This is an excerpt from a book that she also. The whole book is hers.
Women, Politics, and the Novel.
Yeah, which was published in 1988. So,
right. And so there's just some I think some really good stuff. And I want to just start right here on the first page of this, 257. About a third of the way down. Wistful and romantically unfulfilled in the twilight of her life, so the argument goes. The author grows tenderer on romantic subjects she has disparaged. Right? So very much in line with some of this earlier stuff that we've already been talking about, right? But then she goes on, right? Here it is. The underlying assumption, next full sentence. The underlying assumption that Anne's, Autumn, and Austen's are complementary, in other words, that Persuasion, like the other novels, indeed like all novels by women, is the author's own love story, composed with little or no aesthetic distance, is of course teeming with fallacies. And there's this argument in here, right, that we are, under reading in some ways if we think that what's going on here is that Austen is expressing her own kind of wistfulness. She feels the end of her own life nearing, and is returning to this kind of simple romance. And I think Claudia Johnson is like, hold on.
Yeah, and that teaming and the sexual politics of that. When she talks about, of course Jane Austen couldn't get distance because she's a woman. It reminds me of how, very much today, even in our more enlightened age, it is just super common to hear very educated people talk about how, men are better at abstract thought. Men are better at, math. They're better at thinking in terms of systems rather than in terms of the particular. And I think Johnson's sentence there is just like trying to shred that, just like all good thinkers do, who come up against that wall. Man, teeming with fallacies is such a great word group. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, what she wants to focus on instead is this thing that we've been talking about, that she frames as this shift from what she calls 13th century objectivity to 19th century subjectivity.
Love it.
Right? Which of course has built into it, this kind of object and subject in terms of class and political power as well, right? That Anne is subjective and a subject, right? In these ways that I think are pretty interesting. And so I'm inclined to be just generally excited about Claudia Johnson, and I would argue that the length of this excerpt is one, kind of
it shows something about Myers-Spax's opinion of Johnson.
Yeah, it kind of says something there too. But the next thing I sort of have marked, just to kind of walk us through this, is on 267. Okay. She's talking about Mrs. Croft.
Right. We talked about her a lot.
The great, in some ways, maybe like, even more than Anne, maybe the woman we're supposed to.
Well, there is, if somebody said to me, and I thought about our two casts, because I think maybe I might have shown more enthusiasm for Mrs. Croft than any character myself. If somebody just read this book, whether they were just whoever they were, and they said, my favorite character in this book is Mrs. Croft, I would be like, okay, like that to me is a super legit reading. So what does Johnson say about her?
So this is kind of a twofer, but right here at the end of the first paragraph on 267, right? And finally, without ever really appearing to be the eccentric she is, Mrs. Croft prefers warships to the most comfortable manners in the kingdom, throwing overboard as needless weight. What a nice turn of phrase here.
Right. Well, the metaphor stays true to the
right.
Yeah.
Throwing overboard as needless weight the excellencies of the proper lady, and she, quote, shares with him, Admiral Croft, in everything.
Well, I remember the enthusiasm you showed for the scene where they're driving the wagon, and he gets excited about what they're talking about, and he forgets to look at the road, and she's kind of gently, oh, dear, Mr. Croft, and she helps him.
Right.
But without, like...
It's no big deal.
She's not being, like, what's the term, a harridan.
Right.
She's like, well, we're together on this wagon.
Right. We'll make it work.
Yeah.
Right. But what I think is kind of nice about this, aside from just the nice bit of writing, right, is it makes me think about how, part of what is so effective, part of what is so nice about all this interiority of Anne's, right, is that it reminds us that there is all this interiority in someone like Mrs. Croft, even though we don't see it.
That's right.
Even though it's not shared with us.
Yeah.
Like in a more kind of like 20th century publishing model, right? I suspect after this book came out, well, imagining that Jane Austen had continued and grown old, an editor would have come back to her every so often and said, what about a follow-up book that's like a prequel
Following Mrs. Croft?
that gets Mrs. Croft to the days where she is in Persuasion. And you can just imagine this kind of fun, raucous little thing where the Admiral and Mrs. Croft are like getting on board and going to Malaysia or doing whatever kind of fun.
They're like
things.
Indiana Jones and Marion,
right?
In the first Indy,
right, becoming these people, right? That in a way that might allow Austen to explore all of these same themes, just a generation earlier, and have a lot of fun. But it also calls back to something Johnson says on 259, first full paragraph. Persuasion then distinctly minimizes problems which before had been so momentous to heroines. By centering her novel on a maturer heroine, of course, Austen is free to explore female independence without being obliged to explore the concomitant impertinence.
Yeah.
And so I think...
Because 27.
Right.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we're seeing is like, okay, so Emma is a girl.
We forget how young.
We talked about that a lot at the time. Not so for Anne. Certainly not so for Mrs. Croft. And so we see these independent women as adult women who are not sort of like, I don't know. One of my niece had a birthday last week, and it was just sort of funny, chatting with her on the phone, and she's like telling me how the world works, and there is that thing about young people,
right? Well, we make fun of Emma going to the poor people's cottage and explaining to them how to do life.
What you need to do, what you need to understand about how. In my vast experience, this has never been wrong.
As you add to my father's profit, it's important that you feel this way about it.
And and with Mrs. Croft, though, what is she, in her 50s?
I interpreted hers a little younger than that, maybe late 30s.
Okay.
It might even, Austen might reveal it, but I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember either. But I'm imagining someone significantly older than
Anne. Yes.
As this kind of older figure, like she does know, she's not saying what she thinks life would be like aboard a warship. Like she's actually done it.
Yeah.
Right. Anne has actually lived enough life to have worked things out.
It kind of reminds me of the great Vince Vaughn line from Wedding Crashers when he says to Owen Wilson, "Why don't you go out and get some real problems?"
Right.
And both Anne Elliot and Mrs. Croft can say something like that. Two characters like Elizabeth Bennet or Emma.
Right. Even maybe Sir Walter.
Yeah, and certainly that. Yes, that's true. That's true.
And then right towards the end, and then I'll kind of wrap up with Johnson here. She kind of ties this all together neatly on 278 towards the bottom. She's kind of she starts on with some Lionel Trilling saying nothing in the novels questions the ideal of the archaic noble life, which is appropriate to the great beautiful houses with the ever remembered names, right, so on and so forth. But towards the end of that page, but Austen's novels are pervasively concerned, not with according ourselves to an existence. And in some ways, she's speaking straight to D.H. Lawrence.
Yeah.
Not with according ourselves to an existence sweet and dear, but with achieving a more active, expansive, and personally fulfilling happiness. And they persistently suggest that this is well worth the striving.
Yeah.
So this maybe speaks a little bit to that question of Austen's meanness. Maybe it speaks a little bit to the sadness. This idea that maybe people are sad, but there are things we can work towards being happy. I think Anne is happy at the end. I think so. And I think the right thing has happened.
The right things have happened, and I think too that. Even going back to the question of realism and Mrs. Clay and William Elliot, I think part of Anne's interiority and being a little older is she kind of doesn't. She's right to be suspicious. She's the first one to be truly suspicious of Mrs. Clay at the beginning of the novel. Mm-hmm. Elizabeth at first is like, oh, whatever, she's my companion. And even Mary catches on. She's like, man, Mrs. Clay's been around a lot, don't you think? When's she going to leave?
Right.
But in the end, Anne, I guess, becomes older and has gone out and gotten real problems, there's a part of her she never really, to me, felt, and part of this is because her father's such a prick, to care all that much. Like, okay, if he's going to be so vain as to marry her, then fine. Like, I think that had this novel ended with Anne Elliot getting that love letter from Captain Wentworth and then being engaged to him. Mm-hmm. And Mrs. Clay marrying Walter Elliot. And William Elliot just waiting in the wings to get the entail. I think all of that would have been fine with Anne. Right. So, I mean, I think in the end, to come back to the Clay shaping, in the end, maybe Austen's point was, part of being older, being more mature, of doing that work that Johnson's talking about, of like a more abiding happiness, is realizing that you can't control everything anyway. Right. And like, all Anne knows is that she hasn't compromised herself in a way that either William or Mrs. Clay or her father or anybody else can hang around her neck. Like she knows well who she is, and she's sad, but she's doing the best she can out here, you know.
Well, and I would argue even maybe this goes a step further. Yeah. That one of the things that she's doing is she's actively saying, this baronetcy doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right. That which is easy to say. Right, because Wentworth is rich.
Right, of course.
Easier to say, I should say.
And even Croft, like Mrs. Croft's husband, is not poor. Right. He's not a noble.
Right.
Neither is Captain Wentworth.
He can afford to live in the place that Sir Walter cannot.
That's right.
Right. And so I think, not only is Anne saying, like, I haven't compromised myself. I am doing this thing that is both good and makes me happy, or all this. On top of it, she is sort of freeing herself of the chains of this aristocratic obligation. Not too long after this, the stories become sort of Downton Abbey-ish in the sense that it becomes, now how the hell do we keep these estates?
Yeah.
What do we do with these things that can't support themselves?
Walter Elliot's already in that dilemma. The scene with the lawyer at the beginning of the book.
This book blames him for that, right? His bad management.
Yeah.
And I think that as we get into the late 1800s and certainly into the 1900s...
Well, Henry James and Edith Wharton.
Yeah.
Right. Well, once it's like that clash between old money and new money, that's what it centers on. And there's that great moment from one of my favorite, probably my favorite bad girl in all of literature is Undine Spragg from Custom of the Country by Edith Wharton. Yeah. And one of her marriages is to this super snobbish French aristocrat, and the family is like deeply Catholic. And it's like suffocating to her. Like her father-in-law dies, and so she has to wear black for like a year and can't have any fun. And she's so awful. You kind of don't feel bad, but you also kind of do. Mm-hmm. And she wants to. The family's going into deep debt. And the French family. And so she's like, let's sell some of these tapestries, because an appraiser keeps coming being like, I'll pay top francs for...
Right.
And he's like, we will never part with these tapestries. The estate will go down first. Mm-hmm. And then after she divorces him and marries like the new rich Jewish banker, who she also despises, right? But for different reasons, she has... while protecting her anonymity until the second the ink dried and then exploding the name, she bought these tapestries and now has them in her Manhattan apartment, and she knows they know she's got them.
Right.
And that, I think, speaks to what you're saying. It's just like, this stuff can't hold. Like, it's going to be the money.
Yeah.
It's going to be the money. Like, the dignity and title.
Right.
Don't we kind of see it even in American politics in 2026? I mean, I've said for a long time, I think part of why so much of the traditional Republican establishment hates Trump is exactly that. Like, you could probably make a case that the Bush family and the Romney family were like the last gasp of that sort of country club mentality hold. And it's like, no, this crass motherfucker that actually sits on a golden toilet. is going to go ahead and take over now, and you guys can all just go floof away. So, I think the novel does anticipate those tensions that would come to bear in Henry James and Edith Wharton.
Well, part of the shift there, right, is that the old money just became old.
Yeah.
Right. They lost all their money.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we're entirely there in 2026.
No.
But
no.
But I think there is this shift. We're seeing being rich isn't enough. And I think that's kind of similar to what Sir Walter is experiencing. In some ways. But as I think we're about to run out the clock.
I wanted to call attention to one other essay.
Let's both have one more call out, because we still have quite a few people to recognize here.
So John Wiltshire has this essay that he published in 2006 in a book called Introduction and Interventions, Jane Austen, and he makes a nice catch about some of the sexual undertones of the novel on page 313 that reminds me some of that essay we saw Johnson include in Sense and Sensibility, where it's if you read a little more closely, you realize that Marianne has been masturbating. And he makes a similar catch that is pretty on fire, I think, on 313, when he says, this is in the middle of the middle paragraph, Anne's thoughts after their first encounter, that is, her encounter with Wentworth, are presented as a battle, as in a Shakespearean soliloquy between the countervailing forces of desire and self-command, with desire repeatedly infiltrating the pitiful stratagems of the stoic will that are marshaled to quell it, that's beautiful. And then, but since Anne's emotional needs are legitimate, the effect of her struggles is to produce a kind of ironic pathos, and the desire of the reader can only be to await their expression and fulfillment. This sense of intricacy of Anne's psychology, the pull of emotion and perfectly coinciding with conduct, the body, so to speak, shown to have a will of its own, is one of Austen's main achievements in this novel. As an example, unexpectedly discerning Wentworth walking down the street, quote, and then he provides this quote, she now felt a great inclination to go to the outer door, semicolon, she wanted to see if it rained. Period. And then Wiltshire just drops the mic on this paragraph with one sentence. Amusingly, Anne provides herself with an excuse for an inclination that is obviously... But I could have read my whole life and not noticed that was a sexual innuendo, that she wanted to check the outer door to see if her... Like, she saw Wentworth, and she's horny. Like, and so, I mean, it's like, I don't know if he's reaching, but that feels like good criticism to me. That feels like a true Freudian catch. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I think, I'm glad you brought this up, because I think this Wiltshire essay is great. I think it speaks to a lot of the good work that critics had done before he wrote this. And I think there's just some really great stuff. Just in that same paragraph, I mean, it opens, when Captain Wentworth once again enters Anne's life, he thus broaches a tentatively achieved stability. And this idea that her stability is tentative in his absence is kind of interesting, right? That she has to sort of rebalance after this possibility that she had written off becomes possible again. And I think that speaks to a lot of the things we've been talking about in terms of, not just her interiority, the sort of psychological component of the realism in this novel, but also the kind of artistic representation of those things. And I think it's fantastic. I would add to that, if we flip back to Cheryl Ann Wiseman on 281.
Yes. This is a good one too.
She is concerned with that kind of artistic, kind of implications of this, beyond the not beyond, but beside the psychological Freudian kind of realism of this circumstance. She's talking about this doubleness, which ought to be Freudian in its way, but one of the things that she says that I really find interesting on 282, about halfway down, she's talking about all the doubling, like the way the names keep repeating, William Eliot, Walter Eliot, and all of the stuff
Even
there.
even that phrase fairy tale symmetry.
Yeah.
With the names, that's a beautiful.
Right.
There's
Very
some
nice.
really good writing
Yeah.
in the things
Yeah.
Meyer-Spachs chose.
Right.
Yeah.
But right around the middle, the problematic options, I guess this is the second full paragraph, the problematic options of sameness and difference do not double her vision. She recognizes the opportunity for authentically changing the bleakness of her life by remaining faithful to Wentworth, her original and only lover. Right, so this is the way that Wentworth and Mr. Elliot kind of, double each other in a way. Constancy of character and of attachment prevail over the menacing forces of change and confer a happy ending upon the revised fairy tale. After all, and then just another sentence inlaying this hauntingly elemental story are stylistic devices that emphasize its kinship with fairy tales. Austen appears to have gone out of her way to focus attention on the artifice of fiction.
And what have we been talking about a lot today?
Yeah.
It's like we think from the perspective of a writer.
Yeah.
When we talk about clay shaping, so
Right.
that's a great catch.
And so I think that speaks a lot if we think about what were you talking about from
Butler.
Wiltshire.
Wiltshire.
This same kind of this suggestion that one of the things that we are sort of forced to remember because of what I think is the noticeable shift, the more explicitly kind of like literary writerly shift that we see from Austen in this book, what we're forced to remember is she's making this story up.
Yeah, none of these people are real.
At the same time,
Yeah.
that we are supposed to invest as if they were real.
Yeah.
And she is sort of deeply interested, I think, in this moment with what feels like very prescient ideas about representation and how that allows a thing to sort of work and not work at the same time, and she's absolutely striking those stones together in this.
And I find myself always obsessed with that same topic. How could I not be? Just like you, teaching English, and especially if you teach a longer work where the students have had time to get to know characters, they start forming opinions, sometimes deeply disliking, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
You always have to pause and be like, okay, wait a minute, she's not real.
Right.
But I'm reminded of that great moment from Community. When Joel McHale, he's got that little pencil and he's talking to all his acolytes, and he's like, let me introduce you to somebody. Like, this is Mr. Pencil. And he just says three things about Mr. Pencil, and then he breaks it, and they're all like, "Aw, not Mr. Pencil."
Right.
And it's like, yes, artifice is a subject,
Right.
always worth talking about,
Right. Yeah. And I mean, in some ways, Persuasion hasn't been my very favorite.
Sure.
But in some ways, it feels like the noveliest novel.
The noveliest of the novels.
From her.
The most modern.
Yeah.
And I guess looking ahead to Northanger Abbey, which is one I've never read at all.
But I'm coming in with nothing.
A lot of Austen people that I know, it is their favorite.
Okay.
Actually, all the ones we've read, except Mansfield, I know people for whom it's their favorite Austen.
Okay.
So I don't know anybody who says. I'm not saying they
fair,
don't.
Fair game. Fair play.
Yeah,
Right,
there may be some people out there for whom Mansfield is the favorite,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying in my little circle.
Mm-hmm.
But the people who love Northanger, they speak pretty passionately about this sort of what I'm anticipating is something of a dramatic departure in terms of set pieces and tone. So I'm just looking forward to seeing what that's all about, like the gothiness of it and that. So.
Yeah. I'm intrigued about that too. So next time up.
Next time
will
up
be the first go at Northanger.
Yes.
Excellent.